Good afternoon, everybody. I am Jay Barth. I'm the director of the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum, and on behalf of the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton School of Public Service, and the Clinton Library, we are thrilled that you all are here for this important conversation about the role of truth commissions in the development of stable states. And our conversation today really focuses around the question of how important is grappling fully with the human rights abuses of the past in preparing a stable future in a state. And whether they are truth commissions or truth and justice commissions or truth and reconciliation commissions, we know that because of the human rights challenges of recent decades, many nation states have developed these commissions. And there has been a lot of research on individual truth commissions and their effectiveness and their importance in stable state building. But our author's book, Truth Commissions and State Building, really is the first comparative study of the role of truth commissions in this ultimate goal of stable state building. Dr. Bonny Ibhawoh is at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, where he is the Senator William McMaster Chair of Global Human Rights. And he teaches in the Department of History and the Center for Peace Studies. And we have one of our own, our neighbor here to lead this conversation, Dr. Eric Wiebelhaus-Brahm, from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where he is associate professor in the School of Public Affairs. And so we are thrilled that y'all are both here, and I'm going to let Eric take it away.
Thanks very much.
Oh, one more thing before.
Okay.
Bonny has books to sign afterwards, and so he will be available after the event to sign books. So just wanted to get that in. I'll repeat it again later.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for coming to this important conversation, and want to encourage all of you to get involved as well. We were going to start the conversation, but you actually doing a short presentation about an overview of the book. So I'll turn things over to you, Bonny, for that.
So do I do that here or at the podium?
I think it's up to you.
Okay, and the clicker is right here. Yes. Okay, great. All right, so thank you, everyone. Thanks particularly to Rob and Eric for inviting me to your beautiful, beautiful center and your beautiful, beautiful city. So I'll just give a brief overview of what the book is about and what we're trying to say in this book. So I come to Truth Commission, the study of Truth Commission, from three perspectives. I'm a legal historian, I'm a practitioner, but I also do some bit of international policy work. I currently chair the UN Expert Mechanism on the Right to Development. So those are the perspectives that I bring in. And I'm interested in three key themes. The restorative justice component of truth commissions, the question of civic inclusion and public participation, and the third one is the whole notion of non-diffusion. Why has this idea become so popular? We live in a very polarized world, whether you're thinking about states or you're thinking about the international community. If you look around the world today, there is a lot of tension. Some of it is historical, but some of it is quite new. Whether it's the rise of nationalist populism, whether it's a result of toxic forms of digital communication that have further polarized societies, whether it is wars and conflicts happening within and between nations, whether it's the aftermath of pandemics and the devastation, economic and social devastation that has wrought on societies, there are global challenges that needs remedying. And we know that our traditional democratic institutions are increasingly under assault. So the question we ask in this book is a very simple one. How can we deploy these instruments of truth commissions for nation building, for addressing some of these questions? The idea about how functional Truth Commission can help heal this divide is a theme that I've been interested in for a while, starting with op-eds, in the Salon, in international press. Just asking, is this a tool that we might begin to look at more carefully as a way of resolving some of the challenges that confront our society? Do truth commissions heal divided nations? What does it bring to the table? And I will have an opportunity shortly to delve more into detail as to what truth commissions really are. But for now, I wanted to talk about the growing popularity of truth commissions. That's the book that I'll be speaking about. And much of what we talk about in this book come out of two main projects. And I won't bore you with the details of those projects. One of them is the Confronting Atrocity Project based at McMaster University, which is basically looking at how societies are coming to terms with historical injustice and historical atrocities. Because that is where we see Truth Commission feature very prominently. Moments of reckoning for historical injustices, but also in terms of contemporary human rights violations. The other project that frames these debates, at least in the context of our study, it's a project we call Participedia. And this is a global project that monitors democratic participation and civic engagement around the world. It's both a network of researchers, but also a platform, a crowdsourcing platform. We're interested in monitoring and studying comparatively public participation initiatives around the world. So let us talk about truth commissions. Like I said before, we'll delve into the details of what they mean in a moment, but I just want to give you a sense of how widespread this idea has become. Since they first started in the 1980s in Latin America, truth commissions have spread all over the world. There's hardly a continent that hasn't had a truth commission. They started in Latin America in the 1980s as a way of addressing human rights violations by authoritarian regimes. They traveled to Africa, prominently in South Africa, where they were used. A truth commission was established by the government of Nelson Mandela to address the human rights violations of apartheid. And since then, they've been used in, by our last count, over 50 countries in the world. But what makes truth commissions quite interesting is that they have traveled from the global north to the global south. So a few years ago, Canada established its own truth commissions to deal with historical injustices against indigenous people. And so there is, as you can see, a growing popularity of truth commissions. And the question is, what is the appeal? These are bodies, sometimes they have legal powers, sometimes they do not have legal powers. They're established by the states to investigate. And the question often is, why do you need a truth commission when you have a robust judiciary, an established legal system that can deal with human rights violations? And we say that there is a need for truth commissions because of the unique questions that they address. As you can see from the list, I just put some samples of truth commissions around the world there. No two truth commissions are alike. The common denominator is that they are often, not always, established by the states to investigate human rights violations, but I will see increasingly a historical injustice. But there are also grassroots truth commissions that have not been established by the states, but by by indigenous communities or grassroots communities to address injustices. In some cases, the emphasis is on reparations. In some cases, the emphasis is on reconciliation. But the common denominator is truth-finding, some kind of reckoning with the past, reconciliation, and justice. The other point I just want to quickly make is that truth commissions are controversial. There are those who believe that truth commissions have an important role to play in every society. Proponents of truth commissions would argue that as long as societies remain divided, we need to find a way to address the root causes of those divisions. The popular saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Until we dig into the past and really come to terms with those factors that drive divisions, we really won't resolve them. And then on the hand, you have those who say, let sleeping dogs lie. The past is the past, let's move forward. And all that truth commissions can do is to create a disaffection and kind of raise questions that can be divisive. What we try to do in this book is to draw on empirical evidence to really investigate what they do for society. How can they be instruments not just for accountability for human rights violations, not just for as instruments of reconciliation, but most importantly as instruments and mechanisms for state building. Fractured states, divided states, how can these commissions help to heal? And we can speak a little bit more about that here. Like I said before, why we should pay more attention to Truth Commission, it's becoming global. And I think as citizens, as scholars, we need to pay attention to this. And I have there just 3 examples. So there is the report of the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Norwegian Truth and Reconciliation Commission just published its report a couple of weeks ago, and there's a long-standing bill, the US Congress for proposal, it is at this stage, for United States Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So these are questions that are percolating in official circles, in academic circles, and we think that the community have to be part of this debate. We have to understand what they are, and we have to understand what they potentially bring to addressing some of the societal concerns that we have. I don't want to spend too much time because we're going to have more conversation into the details of this, so I will skip a few of the slides. Yes, one that really captures some of the tensions and the debate over truth and reconciliation. Can you have truth and reconciliation at the same time? Sometimes the truth becomes so difficult that it actually stands in the way of reconciliation. That's one of my favorite cartoons from South Africa, following the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And you see Tutu there standing between 2 gulfs, one on truth and one on reconciliation. The suggestion being that it's sometimes difficult to have both. Yet, the aspiration of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions is to find the truth about what happened, bring justice to victims, and hopefully reconcile society, which can be quite complicated if you think about it. Questioning statist agendas. So who benefits from truth commissions? This is the big question. If truth commissions are instruments for state building, whose interest do they serve? And so some critics of truth commissions say, well, they ultimately serve the interest of the state because the state gains legitimacy and the state establishes this commission, and very often the victims themselves do not find resolution in the work of Truth Commission, and that we should continually question these kinds of Truth Commission. And we see some of that, some truth in that, in the conversations we've had in many countries, particularly post-conflict countries in Latin America and Africa, where truth commissions have been established by the state, but have not really resolved some of the grievances of affected parties. But despite this, we also see evidence that they do bring some form of foundation for conversations about the difficult past. And to that extent, they might be instruments of nation building and state building. It's all context dependent. I will end with 2 slides that kind of underscores the reason why we do this work. So for all the arguments for and against truth commissions, one of the things we cannot deny is that they provide a unique space for vulnerable, for the victims, for the marginalized to tell their stories in a public square in ways they would otherwise never have. The court system can be expensive, it can be exclusionary, and we see in almost every country we've studied that those who take advantage of truth commission are mostly women. At every truth commission, over 60–70% of those who appear at public hearings are women. And why women? Women are the ones looking for their husbands, they're the ones looking for their sons, they're the ones asking questions about the disappeared and about violations. So it provides a unique opportunity for women and other marginalized groups who typically would not have access to a traditional legal system to have their stories told, such that even if at the end of the day, the state does not follow up in terms of bringing justice and reconciliation, it at least provides a space for public reckoning about these injustices, whether it's in South Africa, or in this case in Tunisia, or in South Korea, or in Liberia, again and again and again. Truth commissions provide that unique space where the public can engage in difficult issues, have difficult conversations, and hopefully begin to provide the foundations for resolving the many conflicts that fracture our world. I'll stop there, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So one of the things that you've kind of danced around so far is kind of defining what it is we're talking about. And I think in some level, you might have a notion of what a truth commission is in our minds, but let's explore definitions a bit.
Yes.
So
what exactly are truth commissions? Yeah. Eric, as you know, this is a big debate in the scholarship. I would say at the very basic level, truth commissions are bodies, sometimes legal, sometimes judicial, sometimes quasi, semi-judicial, often established by the state to do 3 things. First, find the truth about a human rights violation or historical injustice. 2, bring justice to victims, and justice could mean anything. It could mean compensation, it could mean memorialization, it could mean commemoration, it could mean recognition. And then the 3rd one is to reconcile society, is to reconcile the parties. And truth commissions are founded principally on the concept of restorative justice, as distinct from retributive justice. The idea that the goal here is to restore broken relationships within society. And so in some truth commissions, for instance, there are amnesties for political violence, all with the intent of moving society along and fostering reconciliation. I should add, however, that not all scholars are agreed on how you define truth commissions. There are legal scholars who would want truth commissions confined to those established by the state. But I disagree with that argument, because increasingly we're finding that some of these truth commissions are established not by the state, but by local community organizations and then ultimately adopted by the states. A good example is Guatemala, where the Truth Commission started off as a grassroots community initiative supported by the Catholic Church, which is strong in that country, and then the state ultimately co-opted it or bought into it, and it became a Truth Commission. So I believe in a broader definition of Truth Commission, because as I said, and as you saw in the list, it changes from country to country. So I focus on the three key denominators, but in each country, Truth Commissions have their own flavor. So.
Okay, thanks. For me, when I was a grad student 20-some years ago, it was at a time when South African TRC was just finishing it up. And there was lots of attention, lots of fanfare around it, particularly outside of South Africa. And for me, as a young political scientist, right, what struck me was that this idea about this commission that could find the truth was, on the one hand, very quaintly naive,
Yes.
that this was something achievable, but that also it sounds very Orwellian,
Yes.
that it would be this truth that we would all adopt and accept. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about that nature of being able to find truth.
Yes. When I'm asked this question, I make two references. So the first one is one that some of you in the audience might be familiar with, and it's a biblical reference. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set ye free. A kind of normative assumption that there's power in the truth. But the other reference I make, and I can't quite remember the title of the movie, where the key actor goes kind of frustrated and he says, "You can't handle the truth." Can you handle the truth? So on the one hand, we have two tensions, a kind of biblical assumption that there is power in the truth. We should find the truth. It is healing, it is liberating, but yet we all know that sometimes even finding that truth can be difficult, sometimes impossible, and even when it is possible, we might not be able to handle it. So why find what you can handle? So that's the classic question, and this is a question that states deal with. But it comes from somewhere. It comes from a recognition that you at least need to dig at the roots of the problem. It's more aspirational. One of the questions you get all the time is, why not just use the traditional or the standard legal system? Well, in Canada, for instance, that opportunity did not avail indigenous communities because they say the historical injustices we suffer will be statute bound. We're talking about 200-300 years ago. We can't bring those claims before the court, yet it traumatizes our community. Yes, it's something we need to talk about. So what are the options? The option is, well, there's nothing we can do about it, or we can attempt to provide a space for a conversation about that. So I think it's the whole reference to truth. It's more aspirational. So if you read the Truth and Reconciliation reports around the world, we have about 50 of them now, and so we can do comparative analysis. We find that even the Commission themselves concede that, what we've produced here is a consensus truth. At the end of the exercise, there were varying claims to the truth. People spoke their personal truths. There were disagreements on issues. But what we've tried to provide here is a consensus truth. And a consensus truth is compromised truth. It's a bit of truth here and a bit of truth there. And there are always people who say, well, if it is not the complete truth, then it is a lie. You can have a half-truth. And so I urge those who analyze truth commissions not so much to focus on the word truth in itself, but rather the spirit behind the initiative. It is to dig into the deep past, to try and unearth the sources of grievances and air them and have a conversation about them. And that these are not issues that our legal system, our traditional ways of organizing society are used to doing, you know, and that's really the problem here with truth commissions. They don't fit neatly into the governance structures we've created. I was telling Eric that when Nelson Mandela appointed Archbishop Desmond Tutu as the chair of the South African Truth Commissions, it was met with ridicule. You know, who appoints an Anglican archbishop who knows nothing of the law as the head of a Truth Commission? But that was the whole point, that the goal is not legalistic, it's not retributive, it's not about finding who's right and wrong. It's about moving society away from the fractured past. And if that means drawing on those symbols and those more sociological, cultural dimensions of societal values, so be it. And the state was going to put its power behind that kind of project to make it work. I must say, though, not every Truth Commission has gone down that route. In Canada, for instance, the government appointed a very distinguished retired judge, an indigenous judge, well-versed in the law, in constitutional law, as the head of the Truth Commission. And that commission took a more legalistic route. But that is the point, that there is a recognition that the truth can be problematic, but it's something we should aim for anyhow.
So one of the things that what you've talked about so far is to realize just the diversity of different kinds of Truth Commission experiences around the world. You know, some of them have been more really like academic exercises. Yeah. Others have been more engaged in you know, evidence gathering, more of kind of like a legalistic kind of approach. Others have been, you know, more explicitly rooted in restorative justice, yeah, and being very public by having hearings where people could come and tell their stories. We see examples where the legal mandate that's given for these commissions can take very different forms.
Yes.
And sometimes they're how they define what can be investigated really shapes the truth that comes out in ways that might be normatively problematic. So there's a long way to say that there's a real great variety in terms of Truth Commission examples around the world, you know, from the data that you showed us. What I'm interested in is, and I have been for going back those 20-some years, is what kind of effect these bodies have. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about, you know, to what extent does the different forms that they take really shape what kind of effects they have, you know, particularly in the longer term. You know, yeah. So I guess if there are people in the audience that are thinking about, you know, designing something, you know, a Truth Commission for something or other, do you see some things that would be key in doing that?
That's a good question, Eric. Truth Commissions, by nature, draw their legitimacy from public participation. Because they're grounded in restorative justice, most Truth Commissions do not have legal subpoena powers. They can compel victims or perpetrators to appear before them. There are a few examples, but most Truth Commissions are really built on buying public legitimacy. And so we find that for Truth Commissions to work, the most successful one we've seen are those that started off with a consultative process as to what the goals should be. What do we want these Truth Commissions to do for our society? What guardrails, what parameters do we set for these Truth Commissions? And that can take a long process, because particularly in post-conflict countries where you've had people killing each other for a decade, and now you're establishing the Truth Commissions basically saying, sit together and let's have difficult conversation about the roots of what happened. It is important to have a consensus that, one, we are ready for the truth, because truth-seeking can be premature and just inflame the cycle of violence. So there has to be relative consensus that we can handle the truth. Having said that, there has to be some agreement on the parameters for what we need to talk about. And that can be a very difficult process, and I gave the example of Canada. In Canada, for instance, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out of a legal process. The indigenous community had sued the federal government of Canada for atrocities committed against indigenous students in the residential school system and won a landmark case, millions of dollars, I think, $500 million compensation. But as part of the agreement, as part of that legal judgment, indigenous communities insisted on a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So from the very beginning, the idea was to provide a space for indigenous people to, one, tell their stories about these trauma and these atrocity they encountered and suffered, but also to provide an opportunity to dig into the roots of that problem. Well, how far do you want to dig? And so at some point there was a conversation, and the conclusion was that the Truth Commission could not name names. So if you read the Truth and Commission report, it tells generally about the role of the church, the role of institution, but there are no names of individual culprits. The Truth Commission does not have subpoena powers. And so these are all compromises that were made. You know, some will say it weakened the power of the Truth Commission, it made it a toothless bulldog, it did not really go after justice for victims, and that's a debate to be had. But what is clear is that it provided a unique, and I would add, unprecedented space for indigenous people in Canada to tell their stories in the national public square. So for the whole duration of the Truth Commission sitting, CBC, which is the National Broadcasting Corporation of Canada, aired at least 2 hours of Truth Commission hearings every evening. And Canadians could hear from the voices of those who endured the atrocities of the residential school, what it meant to them and how it affected them. And research shows that it shifted public opinion, that it did have an effect in how the Canadian public viewed these issues and has, to some extent, worked towards reconciliation. Some would say not far enough, but I think there's a consensus that it made some difference. So to answer your question, Eric, I think each society has to have that conversation, and this is where I think grassroots organizations, academics, practitioners, civil society organizations must play an important role in building the foundations for those early conversations. Truth commissions are very rarely top-down. States do not like truth commissions because sometimes they can't handle the truth. Sometimes they like truth commissions because they want to manipulate and get kind of final reports that are favorable to the administration. But Truth Commission really work best when they're ground up, when they come out of community consensus as to the need to have this commission and specifically what it has to do for that society.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've observed in many cases is that even for those commissions that are less than ideal, I guess we'll put it that way, I mean, it creates opportunities for continued mobilization to deal with what wasn't dealt with or what were the flaws of what happened. Yes. So it seems to kind of continue that conversation and be a flashpoint for continued advocacy. You know, in your presentation, you talked about that that appeal and the popularity of truth commissions. And so I want to explore that for a few minutes. If we go back to the 1990s, probably into the 2000s as well, I think this is still around today. You'll sometimes see arguments about truth commissions as being like this weak alternative, like it's a second best option. Yes. And implicitly or explicitly, the best option is to punish those who are responsible. And so the Truth Commission is the weak substitute. And so in that sense, truth commissions are sometimes justified as being kind of somewhat satisfying all sides. There's not, for those who are, for those perpetrators, there's not the criminal accountability, so they're maybe less worried about that. And for victims and activists, it's not as if the past is just ignored. It's addressed in some way. And in some people writing about truth commissions, the proliferation of them are in part by trying to finding that sweet spot between, not fully satisfying either side, but not totally antagonizing either side either. But I want to know what are your thoughts about why has this notion of a truth commission spread? What is the appeal of it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. Eric, in your book, which was one of, I think, the second generation books, I will say, on this, you talk about truth commissions being effective, well, relatively effective on pushing human rights agendas, but not so much on democracy and all of that. And I largely agree with that. But I've also been thinking, why is it growing, And the example I give is Norway. Norway is an industrialized democracy. It's one of the most egalitarian societies in the world. High GDP, if I could think of a relatively perfect country, it would be Norway. But yet Norway, about 5 years ago, chose to establish a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission to deal with the historical injustices against the indigenous Sami people of Norway and the Finnish minorities. And so one of the questions I've asked was the appeal. And the appeal is very different from what it was when Argentina, Chile, Guatemala, El Salvador, South Africa adopted a truth commission. For those post-conflict and post-authoritarian societies, the goal of a truth commission was to address a contemporary human rights violation. If you like, you'll use a medical term, stop the bleeding. The post-conflict societies, Chile after Pinochet was devastated. Argentina had hundreds, thousands of disappeared. Nobody knew where they went. And you had the grandmothers who wanted to know where our sons, where our husbands, what happened to them. So there was an imperative for a truth commission to deal with it, partly because the legal system was overwhelmed. The legal system was corrupt. In many African countries, a truth commission is the only option because they're coming out of decades of civil war. There is no judiciary to speak of. So you have to find a mechanism. So someone described it as a poor man's justice is the alternative. You get a truth commission and they do the best you can. But when you have Norway and Sweden and Australia and Canada adopting this model, the motivation is different. It's not to deal with contemporary human rights violations. You have robust legal system, well, relatively robust legal system and judicial system to deal with it. It is to address what I describe as moments of societal reckoning for historical atrocities. So each society gets to that inflection point where it has to confront the past. At some point, we have to handle the truth. I talk about kicking the can down the road. You can only kick the can down the road so far. It doesn't go away. We see it case after case after case. Each generation, each younger generation, is more interested in knowing about the injustices of the past than the generation that actually experienced it. And that's just how it works. And each succeeding generation is just going to, it doesn't go away historically. I'm a legal historian, and we've studied this, and we just find that the cause intensify if they are unresolved. And so what I think the new impetus is, particularly in the industrialized states of the global north, is addressing that, the generational shift. an inflection point where societies are saying, you know, democratic societies, relatively stable society, saying, we want to deal with this. Now, some may argue that it is manipulative, you know, it's the state just trying to keep people silent, but it also comes from a groundswell of how do we perfect the democracy. You know, here in the United States, we talk about a more perfect union. How do we make it better? And I think in some ways it also reflects a maturity of democracy, that societies are able to have a reasoned conversations about these difficult paths, set the parameters. They're very contentious, as you know, but we are seeing that again and again. Australia, for instance, has had a very difficult conversation about this. Should we have a truth commission, or should we just have a standard commission of inquiry? But the Australian state of Victoria has gone ahead to establish one, and I think that's become the basis for a conversation for a national truth commission to address the injustices against Aboriginal people. So I personally think this will grow. I think the truth commission model will grow more and more. I think they will mean different things for different societies. And this is why I think we need to pay more attention to them and think about how we can harness the best practices that we see with all the examples we now have to make sure that they function well in helping to reconcile divided societies.
And one of the things that I find fascinating is that when these truth commissions first started to be used, they were generally looking at atrocities that have very recently happened. That, you know, there is an authoritarian regime that gets overthrown, and there's some kind of democratic transition that happens, or there's a civil war that's happening, and there's a peace agreement, and so that there's a point in time that creates an opportunity to look at the recent past, you know, things that had just happened. And one of the things that we see more as these truth commissions are used in, particularly in the global north, is looking, that they're often being invoked to look at harms going back generations, and so we're kind of being innovated in a different way. So I think the last thing I wanted to chat about, because I'm mindful of time and want everyone to be able to jump in with their own questions, is that you've talked about the prospects for a truth commission here in the United States, and I'm interested in your thoughts about, you know, what would be the context in which that would be fruitful. You know, what might that look like here?
Yeah, I'm not one to prescribe truth commissions to other countries. What we try to do is provide best practices as academics and let society choose. But to go back to your point, I think societies have to be ripe for a truth commission. And there's also a conversation as to, does this have to be a national one, or does this have to be a community-based one or a state-level one? What we see in the United States is that it's happening. You know, there's Eric, you know, Ashfield recently established a Truth Commission. Maryland has a Truth Commission. There's the classic Greenborough's Truth Commission. So communities on their own are drawing on these universal global models to ask questions about injustices and atrocities that happened within their communities. But what we see often is that it does not have state backing. And truth commissions work best when there is a state sponsor, whether it's at the federal level or the state level or the municipal level. Because if you want to find the truth, for instance, you need to be able to interview government officials, the police, the military. So it needs state sanction. I think in the United States, as it is in Canada and Norway or in an industrialized country, the question will be, what are the issues that we want the truth commissions to address? What are the issues fracturing our societies that the traditional legal system cannot address, that our current democratic institutions cannot address? And how do we frame a truth commission, set the guardrails and the parameters in such a way that it serves the purpose of reconciliation, at least aspires to do that. So those are conversations that have to happen organically. And I think some of that is already happening within communities. I've had, for instance, the Greensboro Truth Commission, you might know in North Carolina, addressed a specific racial incident with the Ku Klux Klan in which some members of the black community were killed, never resolved. And the community decided, well, we'll set up our own truth commission and we'll write our own report, and you're seeing more and more of that. So I think if we use the Canadian model or the Norwegian model, the question will have to be, what are the big national conversations that can lend themselves to a truth commission? As I mentioned and I showed, there is a proposed bill that's been in Congress for many years now to establish a truth commission for the United States to address the history of racial violence. I don't think that will see the light of day anytime soon, but it's been there, and it's been a basis for a lot of conversation in the United States. But bottom line is that each society will have to decide, one, if it wants a truth commission and how it should unfold.
Yeah, and I think you're right that the histories of violence and oppression around the United States vary tremendously.
Yeah.
So, having something that more focuses on the particular issues of that particular place is likely to resonate a lot more. So you've all been patiently listening to us. Wanted to open the floor for questions. Jay, were you going to direct that, or do you want me to? Okay, that sounds just fine. And okay, and is someone monitoring questions that are online? I guess whoever that is, let me know if there is an online question. I guess, Jay, you could go ahead with your first question.
One question I had was the interplay between another historic truth teller, which is high quality journalism in a free society, especially investigative journalism, and truth commissions. Could you talk a little bit about the way in which those can work together, or the way in which they just have fundamentally different roles in telling the truth about the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think they work together. So I gave the example of, at least again in Canada, the media and investigative journalism was part of what really prompted the evolution of the Truth Commission. There is something here to talk about. There's something to do here. But what I think makes the Truth Commission distinctly unique is the public space it provides for the voices of those affected themselves. And so one of the legacies of most Truth Commission is that it creates a body of archives. There's all this testimony in South Africa, 20,000 testimonies at a hearing. In Liberia, 40,000 testimonies. That's not just those who came forward to tell their stories of their trauma and pain and victimization. Those are statement takers, professional statement takers, sent into the community to interview and document these experiences, interviews with public officials. That's a treasure trove of archives. In Canada, what the government has done is to build a national center for truth and reconciliation, affiliated with the University of Manitoba, which holds all the archives, video testimonies, written testimonies, gathered throughout. And when people get frustrated about truth commissions and say, oh, well, they didn't do anything, I can't see any change, I tell them, what about the archives? The archives will be there for another 100 years. It might not make a change in this generation. It might just make a change in 4 generations down the road. So and that's why I'm a bit reluctant to be hasty in passing judgments on the work of truth commissions. Oh, there was no compensation and such, it failed miserably. Well, it produced an unprecedented archive that we typically would never have had if we didn't provide the space. We have a whole generation that told their stories on film, on paper, and on audio. And it will be the work of journalists and historians down the road to dig through these archives. And this is very important because very often the archives we have of these issues are state archives. It's what the state says happened. And you go to the National Archives, it's all official documents. And for legal historians like me, it's refreshing to be able to say, well, I'll look at the legal documents from the state archives, but you know what? I'm going to also look at the public record from the Truth Commission and how those who were victims experienced the same episode. And I think what that does is provides us a more rounded understanding. We begin to get a little bit closer to the truth. So to answer your question, I will say, yes, investigative journalism has a place, but truth commissions, by the very nature of their proceedings, public hearing, and statement taking, also have a very unique place in curating a public archive of these events.
Yeah, and I guess I could just quickly add, I think one thing, role of journalists is to raise awareness about the commission that's actually happening.
Yep.
Up until recently, commissions often didn't focus a lot on outreach, kind of like explaining what their tasks were to communities, and being able to curate that. There have been some commissions, and these tend to be the older ones that were less public in their nature. So journalists were often the way of kind of letting the public know what was going on. It was more behind closed doors. And then lastly, as you were saying, to be able to distill the information from this voluminous amount of information. I mean, especially with more recent commissions where you can put these reports, put them online, and so often we'll have these reports that are 8 volumes long. Each one is 400 or 500 pages, and no one reads it except for us. And maybe we can have AI read it for us now. But so then journalists can then kind of make that those lessons more relevant to your average person. I think there was I saw a question there.
Well,
was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the process used to appoint members of the Truth Commission. It would seem like it would be a real challenge to appoint members that didn't bring forward some biases or perceived opinions. And so are there any best practices on how the appointment process works?
thank you very much for that question. I had alluded to that when I talk about Truth Commissions sometimes being deployed by the state for statist purposes. And typically what we see is, there's a groundswell for a truth commission on a sensitive issue. The government in power says, oh, well, let's address this issue, but we'll select friends of the state. And so it becomes an instrument for legitimizing the state rather than answer. So it's and this is, the best practice is that a truth commission composition reflect the needs of the society. And I'll give you a very classic example that I already alluded to. When Nelson Mandela bucked the trend and appointed an Anglican archbishop who knows nothing of the law to head the South African Truth Reconciliation Commission, it was ludicrous, frankly. As someone who does Truth Commission, I found it ludicrous. Tutu knows nothing of the law. How is he going to chair proceedings? How is going, what? But as the Truth Commission evolved, even I began to see the master stroke in this, because legitimizing the Truth Commission had more to do about selling it to the population, particularly to the black population who were insistent on the Nuremberg-style war crimes tribunal, on revenge. And so the strategy was to have members of the Truth Commission, one who could legitimize the commission in the eyes of the aggrieved black population, but someone who could bring a philosophical foundation to the work of Truth Commission. So Tutu became the champion of Ubuntu, this whole philosophy of, well, you know, this reconciliation is not some alien UN-imposed idea, it's part of our indigenous African philosophy. Now, people would argue that that argument itself was manufactured, but the point is there was a strategy in having particular people who had legitimacy in the eyes of those that the government most wanted to believe in the Truth Commission. And I think much of this comes from the groundswell of conversation that has to happen. A Truth Commission is useless if it is not seen as legitimate. That is the truth, because most Truth Commissions do not have legal powers to subpoena. In few cases, they have powers to grant amnesty, but in most cases, they don't have legal powers. And so it is the soft power of moral persuasion and legitimacy that gives Truth Commission its power. And so for a state that is intent on actually building a Truth Commission that works, the composition has to be representational. One of the things we see with some of the Truth Commissions, for instance, is that they've not had gender balance. So, you know, you're doing a Truth Commissions about a post-conflict Truth Commission, and there are 16 men on the commission. And these are the warlords. These are the same people who fought the war for 10 years. The women who bore the brunt of the conflict are not represented. But we now have, going back to what you said, enough Truth Commissions that we can say, here is an ideal, or a good, we don't say best practices anymore because we know all practices are limited. We say good practice. This is a good practice of how you can go about selecting members of Truth Commissions that will be representative of the stakeholders that will be involved in the process.
And some, like connecting to your Participedia research, I mean, some have been a very participatory process where individuals could nominate people to be commissioners, and that's still relatively rare, but
Yeah.
But seems to be moving towards a best practice, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
Other questions? Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to be truthful with you. When I came here, I didn't really know what you were going to talk about, so I didn't know what a Truth Commission was. But as you started your conversations, I was reminded of a quote, and I don't know who said it, but history is erased. The erasure is forgotten. The lies become the truth. And as we were talking, Jay was talking about the media, and Eric also, and then how we start these things. This is not really a question. It's just a thought that I've had. We are at a place right now in America where we need some truth commissions to bring out the truth so that we don't keep erasing history to where our children will not know history. And I'm not going to cite what the elephant in the room is right now, but there's so many misinformation, so much misinformation that we're losing the real truth, and all these lies that keep coming out being quoted by the media of people that are starting this. How can we go beyond this so that we don't lose the truth and don't have to go back and keep researching for it?
Good question. So, and I like that quote, but I would add, the truth is never really lost. It is hidden from public view. So the truth will not be lost. There will just be a gulf in our understanding of the truth. And this is what we saw in Canada, that while the history of the residential schools were not largely taught in the universities, were not in the history books, indigenous communities passed that story from generation to generation. So indigenous communities were very aware of that story. It was never lost in the community, whether through oral tradition or documented evidence or through wampum belts. They were very acutely aware of that history. It was the rest of society that needed to do the catching up. And the longer that took, the wider the gulf and the wider the grievance. And so that is what we find, that it's not so much that the truth is lost. Victims don't forget their victimhood. It's there, it's passed on. It is that the gulf between the public or mainstream narrative becomes increasingly wider than the gulf of those who are seeking justice. And that is a prescription for societal tension, upheaval, and chaos. What a Truth Commission does, hopefully, is to provide a space for a general conversation. And we've talked about this. There will be truths from very unique perspective, but at least there is a baseline for a national conversation. In some countries like Rwanda, which suffered a genocide, some of you may know this, a devastating genocide in which 1 million people were killed in 3 months. They decided to rewrite the history of the country and say, well, one of the problems was that we had a history that fostered these kinds of issues. And so one of the mandates of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was to produce a national history. Now, scholars may question, can you really produce one national history? But at least that was the goal, to begin to think about histories that brings all these truths together. So I would say we have to recognize when people say, well, why do we need a Truth Commission? The most compelling argument I think I make is, one, you can't keep kicking the can down the road, and the truth won't be lost. It will just be siloed in certain sections, and it will create a gulf between the worldview of those sections and what you present as the mainstream view of the history of the state.
All right, thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Ibhawoh. Am I in the right spot? Thank you for a really, truly thoughtful and important conversation about the power and the limitations of these instruments that are going to be part of our future internationally for the remainder of our existence. And Eric, thank you so much for facilitating this great conversation. And of course, thank you all for being here, being part of our community at the Clinton Presidential Center, where conversations like this can happen. And we can't wait to see you back for the next time. I did want to highlight one thing. We are now 2 weeks away from the end of our temporary exhibit, Be Our Guest, which focuses on diplomatic visits during the Clinton administration. We urge you to take a look at that if you haven't already. And we hope you have a restful weekend and a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being here. And books are available right outside, and I know that you would be glad to sign a few. Thank you. Bye-bye.